Under the serene landscape of Derbyshire's Peak District lies a story of adventure turned tragedy. In March 1959, in the labyrinthine depths of Peak Cavern, a young man's passion for exploration met a chilling fate. Not by rock or wall, but by something far more horrifying: himself. Join us as we unravel the truth of Neil Moss's death. Was it a gruesome accident, or something more sinister lurking in the shadows? Neil Moss, born on July 28, 1938, was a young man with a zest for life and a keen interest in exploring the unknown. He was studying philosophy at Balliol College, Oxford, and came from a well-to-do family, his father being a prominent British cotton executive. At 20, Neil was not just an academic. He had a strong passion for sports and a particular fascination with caving, a hobby gaining huge popularity at that time, especially with the rise of caving clubs. In his first year at university, Neil joined the British Speleological Association, BSA, a renowned caving group founded back in 1935. The BSA was pretty famous for its discovery of Lancaster Hall, one of the most extensive and intricate cave systems in Britain. Neil quickly became a well-liked member of the club, actively participating in various caving expeditions. This drive for adventure is what drew him deeper into the world of caving. Neil was quite skilled at caving, though he wasn't the most experienced out there. On March 22, 1959, he and 7 other members of his caving club decided to take a day trip to Castleton. They were keen to explore Peak Cavern, one of the most well-known caves in Britain. Castleton, located in the Peak District, is a quaint English village set against the stunning backdrop of the Derbyshire countryside. It's a place straight out of a postcard, with its rolling hills, limestone cliffs, and a network of vast caves that attract adventurers and nature lovers alike. Peak Cavern is one of the star attractions in Castleton, and it's the biggest cave system in the Peak District. It's a natural limestone wonder, really setting itself apart from other caves around there. What's cool about Peak Cavern is that it wasn't formed through mining like some others. It's all nature's handiwork. It's got a bunch of chambers to explore and a pretty interesting history. Once upon a time, rope makers actually lived in there, using the cave as both a home and a workshop. Nowadays, it's a bit of a local hotspot. Neil, along with his team, set out to explore a recently discovered passageway on March 22, 1959. This particular passage, about half a mile from the cave's entrance, had been discovered just 2 weeks earlier, and cavers from all over the UK were itching to explore it. So, on that day, they arrived at Peak Cavern, ready for adventure. They had to crawl through some really tight spots, about 1,000 feet underground. After about an hour of navigating these narrow passages, they stumbled upon an opening. This led them to a large, yet-to-be-named chamber, which was their target for exploration. The chamber they found was absolutely breathtaking. The group just stopped in their tracks, totally captivated by its natural beauty. As they looked around, they spotted the narrow shaft that had been discovered just a couple of weeks before. It was like a mysterious hole in the ground, hinting at all sorts of unexplored wonders. Now, 4 of the cavers in the group had actually been part of the team that found this shaft previously, so they knew what they were up against. This wasn't just any old shaft. It twisted and turned, presenting a real challenge. They figured it was about 40 feet deep. Just to be safe, they lowered a 75-foot ladder into the hole, thinking it might go deeper than they thought. Then came the moment of decision. Who was going to be the brave soul to venture down first? Even though Neil was a tall guy at 6 feet, he was pretty slim, which made him think he could handle being the first to go down that challenging shaft. The shaft itself was a bit of a maze. It started off tilting, then twisted and inclined for about 12 feet, and finally dropped straight down for 18 feet. Neil started his descent, careful and calculated. But when he was about 40 feet down, he hit a snag. Some small boulders were blocking his path. The space was super tight and claustrophobic, and to try and clear the rocks, Neil had to twist into an awkward position. In doing so, he accidentally jammed the ladder below him. Suddenly, he was stuck, wedged between the ladder and the shaft wall in complete darkness. He tried to free himself for about 30 minutes, but eventually he realized he couldn't do it on his own. He was stuck there, deep in the shaft. Neil, realizing he was in a tight spot, called out to his teammates above, "I'm stuck, can't move an inch." He suggested they try lifting the ladder while he held on. The team up top managed to move him a few inches, but then the ladder got jammed again, and they had to think of something else. At this point, nobody was panicking. They started a standard rescue operation, dropping a rope down to Neil. In Neil's head, he was thinking he'd be out in no time. The group lowered the rope, Neil tied it around himself, and they started pulling. But the shaft was tricky, with sharp turns, and the rope snapped in just a few seconds. Undeterred, they tried again with a different rope. This time, they got Neil about 2 feet up before the rope broke again. Neil was still stuck, and the situation was getting more serious. As things started to look grim, some of the cavers rushed off to get help, and in no time, volunteers from all across England poured into Peak Cavern to try and rescue Neil. It wasn't just locals either. The RAF, police, and even the Navy showed up to lend a hand. But as hours ticked by, they hit another snag they hadn't anticipated. With Neil wedged so tightly, the little air that was circulating in the shaft got cut off. This led to a dangerous buildup of carbon monoxide, all coming from Neil's own breath. The air became thick and foul, and it was clear that the situation was getting critical. Neil started losing consciousness, and everyone realized they were racing against time in a much more serious way than they'd thought. Neil, in his dire situation, even asked the rescuers if they fancied a meal out, a sign that things were getting really urgent. They needed to act fast. They sent down experienced cavers one after the other, trying to reach Neil. But that awful toxic air turned them back every time, with some even passing out from the fumes. One volunteer, Ron Peters, actually managed to get to Neil and tie a rope around him. But that just made Neil's breathing even harder. So Ron had to remove the rope and head back up. They brought in oxygen tanks to Castleton, and a doctor tried pumping oxygen down to Neil through a tube. Despite all these efforts, they just couldn't get him out. Time was slipping away, and everyone was feeling the pressure. The rescuers were really at their wits' end trying to get to Neil. They had this drastic plan where if someone could actually reach him and handle the toxic air, they'd break his collarbone to free him. But nobody could even get that close. They even brought in one of England's top cavers, known as Bubbly, but even he couldn't make a difference. Sadly, by the morning of the second day, things took a turn for the worse. Dr. John Carter, an RAF doctor who was monitoring the situation, had to declare Neil Moss dead on March 24, 1959. Everyone there, the rescuers, Neil's fellow cavers, they were all devastated by the outcome. Neil's dad, who had been waiting outside the cave the whole time, was heartbroken. He was the one who decided that no more lives should be risked trying to retrieve Neil's body. It was a really tough call, but he didn't want anyone else to end up in the same tragic situation as his son. Neil's dad asked that his son's body be left where it was, and that they seal up the shaft. So they filled it in with rocks. It turned out that Neil had died from an excess of carbon dioxide in his blood, a pretty grim way to go. Despite all the brave efforts under such tough conditions, there was a lot of talk about the rescue operation being poorly organized and mishandled. The media coverage wasn't kind to the cavers and the whole caving community, with some people even calling for caving to be banned, labeling it as irresponsible and dangerous. Of course, that didn't happen. Neil's story became pretty infamous around Castleton, and it's still a topic of conversation to this day. The chamber near the shaft where he got trapped was eventually named Moss Chamber in his honor. There's even an inscription on the wall there, a lasting reminder of Neil and the tragedy that unfolded in those depths. This whole incident was really tragic, but it's key to remember the amazing effort of the rescuers. Some of them had never even been underground before, but they still did everything they could to try to save Neil. The whole ordeal actually had a big impact on the Derbyshire Cave Rescue Organization. It led to better rescue techniques and safety measures that are still in place today. Peak Cavern, despite its dark history, remains one of England's most famous and significant show caves. Loads of people visit it every year. And as for Neil, may he rest in peace. If you have any thoughts about cave exploration and its risks, please drop a comment below. And hey, if you're up for more intriguing and chilling tales, check out the video popping up on your screen right now. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button